Assalamualaikum and good morning to Dr. Fatia and fellow friends. We are from Group 3. We present question 12, 13 and 14. My name is Nuruddin Abiti Shakimi. My matric number 264973. Okay, do you agree that the board should not develop such a proposal? Why or why not? For this question, we agree that the board should not develop a proposal that allows some intangible asset to be included into the goodwill. This is because the company had been fulfilled two conditions in recognizing the intangible asset, which amended by IAS 38. The first condition is the asset will provide future economic benefit that derive from contractual or legal rights. The second one, the intangible asset can be separate from its company and sold, transfer, register, list or exchange. If the acquired intangible asset cannot be separately identified, it should be included into the goodwill. The measurement of intangible asset using the fair value model. There are three approaches in determining the fair value. The first one is market approach. The second one is cost approach. The third one is income approach. I will pass to Farah to continue this question.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Nofara Izzati binti Muhammad Rizwan. My matric number is 264549. Okay, I will continue for this question. Okay, while for goodwill, it is also known as intangible asset that is associated with the acquisition of one business by another. It is also known as an asset that is asset that reflects the potential economic benefits they gain in a target market. Goodwill is calculated as the difference between the consideration paid plus any non-controlling interest and the purchase date for the fair value of the identifiable net asset. In 2014, additional exploration was directed by the FASB on the subsequent calculation of goodwill that include the implementation review of its business and also the of its business combination criteria by the IASB. However, it did not make any decision on this topic and also instead asked their employees to do the additional research on the identifying the most appropriate useful life of goodwill. If goodwill were to be amortized and simplifying the goodwill impairment test. As a conclusion, we think that the recognition of intangible asset and also the goodwill should be recognized separately because it will provide insight on why acquisition was made and also the acquirer's primary asset. But we are concerned that some intangible asset can be considered to be included in goodwill because of some companies recognize intangible asset as expense, but some others company recognize intangible asset as their as to be included in goodwill as part of the goodwill. So it will be difficult for the investor to make comparison between of them because they will use the difference maybe different type of recognition.
Okay, for question 12b, if you do not agree, which approaches in paragraph 5.80 should the board pursue and why? Would such a change mean that the investor no longer receive useful information? Why and why not? How would it reduce complexity and cost? Which of the costs will be reduced? Okay, if we do not agree, the board can pursue the approach about the internally generated intangible asset that are not recognized in the acquired financial statement. Let's say company B is external party and receive requests from company A to develop an asset. Company B must meet the requirement of IAS 38 in recognition of internally generated intangible asset so that the company A can recognize it in financial statement. IAS 38 require the research and development costs can be recognized on initial where the asset must be established only technically and commercial feasibility of the asset. This implies that the entity must able to complete and plan to use the developed asset and should explain how the asset can produce future economic benefit. If the asset that created are not certified the recognition of internally generated intangible asset, the cost should be recognized as research expenses and would be paid as incurred expense. Since it recognized as incurred expense, it can influence the net profit of the company. So, if the approach is permitted by the board, the company can recognize internally generated intangible asset as an asset, and it can affect the net profit of the company, where the net profit of company can be increased. Okay, if this change is amended by the board, the investor can receive the information as useful information. This is because, for example, if the company engaged in construction industry that need to develop an asset, the investor can use the information as they need to know why the asset are developed and whether the asset can produce future economic benefit. The investor also can know about the process of development the asset. This information is useful in knowing about the company growth, as they can use it to make decisions if they want to invest in that company. By changing the requirement, the company can reduce the cost and complexity. This method can minimize the needs in determine and value particular intangible asset. If goodwill and intangible asset are recognized separately, the company need to acquire an expert for each of the asset. The recognition of intangible asset is complex, so the company need to pay more on the cost of identification. Hence, if the intangible asset is recognized within goodwill, the company can reduce the cost of identification as they only need to acquire an expert that specializes in goodwill. For the next question, I will handle it to FAR.
Okay, we move to the next question, which is question 12C. The question asks, would your view change if the amortization of goodwill were to be reintroduced? Why or why not? Our view will not be changed. Our view, which is the intangible asset and also the goodwill, should be recognized separately if the amortization were to be reintroduced, because there are some views that saying that goodwill is uncompleted instruments for lessening the risk of overstating goodwill, while there are some views that saying that goodwill is not wasting useful life, and that there is more useful knowledge from the impairment only model. Okay, the amortization of goodwill, if the amortization of goodwill were to be introduced, it would be better if intangible asset and also the goodwill recognized separately. This is because it will be more difficult for the company to determine an appropriate useful life of goodwill if both intangible asset and also the goodwill were combined. some investor believe that if they approach only for the impairment, it will it will be useful for relating the price paid to what was they acquired. Besides, the participant also thought that impairment is the impairment loss is recognized as too late, which is time consuming. If the company want to amortize the goodwill, uh, if the amortization of goodwill and also the tax impairment were implemented, it will be a cost to the company, because the company has to pay more on the expert to do the amortization and also the impairment test. As a conclusion, we believe that it should be better if not reintroduce amortization, and should retain the impairment only model.
Next, we further our discussion on question 13. Do your answers to any of the questions in this discussion paper depend on whether the outcome is consistent with US GAAP as it exists today, or as it may be after the FASB current work? If so, which answer would change and why? So from the first view that we have on question 7, we agree with the board's proposal to retain the impairment-only model for goodwill. We found that the answer in the proposal consistent with FASB current work. Based on the KPMG view, there are some arguments regarding the views on the amortization of the goodwill, whether it should be reintroduced or not. Some view the amortization as a simple mechanism for reducing the risk of overstated goodwill, but there are also some arguments saying that the goodwill is not a wasting asset with a finite useful life, and impairment-only model provide the most useful information to the stakeholder. So, after seeing the argument from the discussion paper, we decided to change our decision in question 7. So we choose not to agree with the proposal of the board and decided to reintroduce the amortization. So, why are we change our decision? The argument stated that reintroducing the amortization will give off more benefit to the company. Why? This is because since the goodwill cannot be tested directly, the cost of testing the cash generating unit CGU for impairment of goodwill could be reduced. Not only that, even though the amortization is reintroduced, the need for impairment testing would still be continued and would not be eliminated in a certain condition or situation, meaning that when the stakeholder uses an impairment test to measure their goodwill priorly, they still can make changes on the next measurement, which by using the amortizations. In addition, the costs are highly needed since the stakeholder are only allowed to use one method in recognizing the goodwill, which is an impairment test.
Hi, I will continue with question 13. I will discuss about the answer in question 12. Okay. Our early impression of question 12 is that the board should develop a proposal to allow the recognizing of intangible asset to be included in the goodwill. This answer in the question 12 in the discussion paper is consistent with the US GAAP that existed today. However, we decided to change our answer from intangible asset recognized should be included in the goodwill to intangible asset should be recognized separately and not included in the goodwill. There is a few arguments about the changes from recognizing the intangible asset included in the goodwill to recognizing the intangible asset separately from the goodwill. Okay, the first argument is the cost. Some argue that the cost of recognizing intangible asset separately from the goodwill is very high and costly compared to recognizing the intangible asset included in the goodwill. The second argument is the convenience preparer in recording the intangible asset. Some argue that using the approach of recognizing the intangible asset included in the goodwill is less work and less complexity compared to using the approach of recognizing the intangible asset separately from the goodwill. Okay, the third one is the information usefulness. Okay, some argue that although the recognizing the intangible asset separately from the goodwill give more information compared to recognizing the intangible asset included in the goodwill, but they say that it is still useful and it is not enough reason to change asset included in the goodwill to recognizing the intangible asset separately from the goodwill. To support the change in the answer, okay, the first one, the intangible asset recognized separately help describe in detail about the company purchase. Okay, separation in intangible asset recognized can be helpful information to the majority of the stakeholder. Okay, it is also said that separation intangible asset recognized can give a better foundation towards the company purchasing. Okay, the second one is intangible asset with limited useful life that are recognized separately. It can be amortized compared to intangible asset that is combined together. The intangible asset cannot be amortized. Okay, the next one is the board identify the disadvantage of recognizing the intangible asset included in the goodwill. Okay, the first disadvantage is the loss of information related to the intangible asset since they different of characteristic. Okay, the next one is the reduction in proportion of the intangible asset recognized separately will not respond to the frequent requirement to improve financial reporting by giving more information regarding the intangible asset, which is very important to the contemporary economy.
Next, I will explain the answer for question 14. So the question asks if we have any other comments on the board's preliminary views presented in this discussion paper, and should the board consider any other topics in response to the PIR of IFRS 3. Our comment regarding this discussion paper is that the board should suggest other methods that can apply to reduce the cost and intricacy in conducting impairment tests for goodwill. The method to be suggested should not reduce the usefulness of the information for the investors. For example, the headroom approach mentioned in this view will incur significant costs to perform impairment tests because the companies need to determine a recoverable amount more precisely than what have been needed at the date of the previous test. So, to increase usefulness of the information provided, it will require a higher cost and increase the complexity. So that is why we could ask for the board to suggest any other strategies to obtain a useful information without adding a high cost. Next, the other topics that should be considered by the board is the discussion of negative goodwill under IFRS 3. The board is required to give a view and discuss regarding the part where the recognition of negative goodwill is often difficult for the stakeholders to explain to the users. So the stakeholders are having difficulties in explaining to the users regarding the case where the immediate recognition of negative goodwill as a gain in profit or loss causes periodic mismatch when the future losses are recognized, where the negative goodwill mainly comes from anticipated future losses. Next, the board should enlighten the user about the treatment of bargain purchases, which are difficult for users to understand.
as some of the users consider that the negative goodwill should be recognized as a reduction in the value of assets rather than gain in profit or loss. Next, the board should consider to give a more detailed guidance on the impairment test on goodwill when the NCI are measured at the fair value. Many find difficulties in measuring NCI while using the fair value as the measurement basis. With the lack of guidance in developing the impairment test on goodwill, if the full goodwill method is applied, the stakeholders have concern regarding the valuation and impairment in relation to NCI. Other than that, the board should discuss the option of the measurement of NCI. So there are two options in measuring the NCI, which are whether using the proportionate interest method or using the fair value method. The stakeholders can choose either one option to be the basis of measurement for NCI. But there are some views from the stakeholders saying that they prefer to have a single measurement option instead of having the option they have now. So the board should investigate and evaluate the preferences of the stakeholders to see whether the single measurement option would be useful and helpful for the stakeholders or not.
So that's all from us, Group 3. Thank you.